moment or so to maybe collect your thoughts, and Cameron as well, since you both were at the last commission meeting in April. But from a future looking perspective, to give everybody a little bit of line of sight, the May 8th policy board meeting where we were planning to have the recommended attendance and compensation policies go before the policy board, it's still on the agenda, but that May 8th meeting was moved to May 29th. So it's just a couple weeks later, it's 3 weeks later. The postponement of the meeting was driven by the news that we got from Virginia's Department of Rail and Public Transit. They gave us a deadline extension on the submittal of our Unified Planning Work Program. Given the review that you all have probably read about at the federal government of all the different federal grant funding streams and everything like that, DOPT hasn't gotten the numbers for what we're going to get funding wise in the next fiscal year. And so since they haven't provided the grant award amounts, they gave us an extension on the submission for how we're going to program that money. And so then we took advantage of that extension and felt like our hope is that before the May 29th policy board meeting, we'll have those numbers and we'll be able to present a work program that's it's a little bit more grounded in real award amounts. Jessica, since you're on that board, I will just say 3/4 of the Unified Planning Work Program, which is the grant, we say this differently. Our transportation planning program is funded through 2 grants, one from Federal Highway Administration, one from Federal Transit Administration. It's about a 75-25 split. So 75% of the money comes from Federal Highway, it passes through VDOT, and 25% of the funding comes from FTA and passes through the RPT. We have the number for the Federal Highway grant. So when I talk about this uncertainty, I mean, it's really 25% of the budget, and we're expecting the number to stay at roughly level funding. So when I talk about uncertainty, our degree of uncertainty is pretty minimal. But in this particular environment, we feel like we want to be more certain than less. And so the extension really helped with that.
Okay.
Andrew, I was just telling the group a little bit of the background about why the policy board meeting was rescheduled from May 8th to May 29th. And then, of course, the recommendations from this group that passed through CPAC and public outreach are still on the agenda. It's on a 3-week. Just push back through.
Sorry.
No worries, we're just getting started. So we're on agenda item number 2, and just wanted to kind of do a little bit of a recap about the work that this committee has done so far, and to be able to provide any kind of just room for discussion of the group. Jessica did do a presentation. Presentation might be a little bit too strong of a word, but an update to the Plan RVA Commission. They're not taking action on the attendance policy or the compensation policy, but it was, I think, a nice FYI. And I feel like it generated a pretty positive conversation. So I thought maybe if you and Cameron want to give your thoughts.
There were some folks that had similar thoughts that were opposed to compensating people for things, but the majority of people were, some people came up to me afterwards and were very positive about it. And thank you for working on that to let a good step towards getting more, hopefully more accurate data and more attendance, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. So I think overall, yes, there was, you remember, I'm sorry. What about you, Cameron?
Yes, I remember some things.
Okay.
There was definitely the majority of people were interested in what we presented.
Yes.
There were a few individuals who were against it, and then there were some people who really just had a lot of the same questions that we all posited as a group about how do we make this work, and how, are we actually getting underserved communities in here, and like, how are we capturing their voices in this decision-making process? We've all talked about this, and we've kind of, recognized that for this to be an effective policy, we need to maybe roll this out slowly. And to do so, through kind of those three tiers that Ken defined and brought up was a good way to do that. So I think the majority of people were into it. There were some questions about it. And you know, the people who said no, there weren't a lot of them. So I think in general, people were very happy with what we had produced. And we'll kind of see how it plays out.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I stressed very clearly that it was a pilot program because those that, you know, that we don't know all the answers yet, and we'll find more out at of the pilot. Hopefully that gets us to a better place.
And do you have anything you would want to add?
No, I think that, you know, the fact that we stressed it was gonna be a pilot,
Yeah.
that we were going to evaluate it,
Oh,
that we were looking for certain evaluation criteria, and we've come up with a few things already, you know, I think all of that, helped to, create buy-in around the proposal.
I think a couple of things that we talked about as being armed with from an information perspective are, I think Janice and Ken had already collected information about where our localities already offer stipends. So this isn't a novel concept to offer, honorariums to members of committees. Many of our localities do it, some of our regional boards do it, so it's not like this is groundbreaking. And I think the other thing that Ken's given consistent thinking about even after the last joint meeting between the CTAC and the public outreach is on that measurement side, like how do we really measure whether or not this is achieving the goals that we want? So we know attendance is a good indicator of this, you know, it's a little bit hard to measure engagement.
Yeah.
But if this is a first step, I think somebody said like in this continuum, Cameron, you were kind of talking about this, if it's sort of like thinking about a continuum and this is a step up in that direction, then is the compensation of CTAC members aiding in attendance, participation in meetings, and therefore are we seeing CTAC members sharing in their networks the information that we're talking about? And, you know, so that gets a little bit harder to measure quantifiably as you go kind of out in those ripples, but I think that that's kind of the general sense of what we're trying to do. So there might be something that we think about heading into next fiscal year of a qualitative question, you know, of CTAC members. Like, are you talking about this with your friends and family and networks at the beginning of the year? And if by the end of the year, do you feel a little bit more kind of invested in this, that it's coming up in conversation? I mean, it might be as easy as some kind of a qualitative reflection question like that. So we're thinking about that and trying to kind of, you know, not over engineer this, but think of a couple ways that we might be able to present findings of this pilot.
I remember someone asked, well, I think it might have been Mark Miller asking about how much it was gonna cost.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and Martha had the dollars and stuff, so, I mean, and again, she had the dollars of the maximum that could be, but again, attendance right now is nowhere near
Yeah.
that, so, yeah, so I guess we'll see, what happens.
And the other thing I think I'll just name is that one of the board members did say, well, why are you limiting it to CTAC? Why aren't we doing it for the non-elected officials on the Plan RVA board? And so again, it was like, well, this is a pilot.
Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah.
I mean, thanks to those of you that sit on the public outreach and engagement side of this kind of operation, because I believe Mr. Hathaway, Mr. Chambers, both of the two of you spoke up at the meeting. So it made clear in the meeting that this had been a process that was inclusive of a lot of people and a lot of perspectives and that kind of thing. So I think that also gave some confidence that even though some questions were coming to mind, it was very clear that people have put a good amount of effort into this. So that's kind of where we are. And I mean, I don't want to be like, it's closed, it's final, but for purposes of this work group, it feels like we've, you know, we'll monitor and obviously we'll keep everybody up to date about how the policy board action goes. But our thought is that we would have some communication with CTAC members once the policy is adopted, but before the new fiscal year starts to roll this out. And our staff can take the lead on that communication. And then there's an opportunity, and we want to talk about this a little bit with the group today in the context of Title VI, but also relating these two work efforts of membership. So we have some empty seats on the CTAC, and so this might be an opportunity to sort of think about that targeted outreach. I know Kristen has a perspective about some groups that we might be able to seek representation to fill some of those seats, and so this feels like this is a nice way to head into that kind of recruitment phase. So
I think I had mentioned once before that, I know you have the Richmond NAACP, but Chesterfield, I'm on their board, but I mean,
yeah,
Chesterfield and NAACP are a very active group also, so they might be.
I mean, I think our hope is that we could put a list of prospective organizations and then have a recommendation that would go to the policy board to have those organizations approved. I think that's how we do it. So that'd be great. Yeah, so brainstorming would be really good. Okay. Well, our second task as a work group is to undertake a review of our Title VI plan. We had built this into the work program for this fiscal year, largely driven by our Title VI plan says we will review it regularly. So it's a thing that's on our regular queue of to-dos. It's timed in a way that in preparation for our recertification of the Transportation Planning Organization, there's a Title VI compliance as part of that federal recertification. So it's timely that we would go through this process in anticipation of that review happening in the fall. And then also coincidentally, the state's Department of Transportation has initiated a state review of our Title VI compliance, and that is underway right now. The documentation and all the requested materials, it's a desk review. So they've sent me a letter, they've given me a list of a form that we need to fill out, and I'll send that back, and the deadline is May 9th. So we're in kind of a really nice window of time right now where Title VI is it's timely, right? So the other thing, and I just want to make a confession to all of you, Ken and I were chatting a little bit this morning. We had planned to come into this meeting from a preparation perspective, giving you all access to the existing Title VI plan that was linked in the packet. Our thought was that we would use training materials that were developed a year or two ago and that we use as part of our Title VI training. As a ground level setting kind of thing for the committee. And Ken and I were looking through the slides, and I think we had pretty good consensus yesterday about what slides would be most helpful for this group. And then you may have heard that there was a new executive order that was issued on the 23rd from the President's administration that speaks more completely around non-discrimination laws and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yesterday there was a memo distributed from Secretary Duffy's office, the Secretary of Transportation of the United States, also clarifying this. So we were doing some quick review this morning. So I cannot 100% confirm that everything that on these slides are consistent with kind of our new guidance because it's evolving, but I flagged a couple slides that we can kind of talk through, and I can share with you if it's okay with you, since this is a work group, we're going to lean on you a little bit to help us puzzle through and think through some of these things because we don't have answers to everything about what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. So again, I think all this is very timely. So if it's all right with everybody, we will go through, it's a big deck, so I'm going to try to talk fast and move through these fairly quickly, but we'll do the training information as a level set. And on the front end of this, the CTAC and public outreach committees are going to meet again jointly on May 15th. And we'd love to get your input about how much of this should be shared with the whole of the group, just so that they can also get kind of a baseline of understanding of this. A little bit of background. This deck was actually prepared by a consultant on our on-call bench, KLT. they're a great firm that we've used for a number of different projects, and they helped develop this and deliver this training, not just to us, but our statewide network of MPOs and planning district commissions. It helped in the last triennial review cycle, helped as a follow-up action for all of our MPOs across the state to be able to meet our Title VI requirements. Part of that is education and training. And then Holly and I attended a training not conducted by them and not as well. The slides weren't as beautifully designed as they are here, but Holly and I attended our annual training last spring that Hampton Roads Planning District Commission hosted. Yeah.
Just so that I'm understanding the scope of this, so is this Title VII or Title VI compliance with or for the state or for Plan RVA that is consistent with state guidance and that's why you shared it with the networks? Like, is this Plan RVA's?
Yeah, so Title VI is part of the United States Code. As you know, it's federal law. And there will be some slides in here to talk about this, but all recipients of federal funding are subject to compliance with Title VI. So every planning district commission in Virginia is subject to Title VI compliance, as is every metropolitan planning organization. And so when we were thinking about engaging a consultant to develop a training program for our staff, because it's really important that it's not just one member of staff that knows about Title VI, that everybody does. We're like, well, why should we pay all this money to have a consultant deliver this training just to us when we could leverage and provide that to our whole network? So we hired the consultant, they developed the training, and then we brokered that training to be available to everybody across the Commonwealth. And they paid their registration fee, which helped offset a little bit of our costs on the upfront part to build the training and everything. And they paid for their lunch and that kind of thing.
Okay, that makes sense.
The federal government says that you're supposed to go through Title VI training on a regular basis, and they had not offered it for about 5 years. And so after both Hampton Roads and we went through a federal certification review where they named that they felt like we were a little bit light on training. We kind of said, well, gosh, they're not offering the training. We're light on the training. We need to proactively do this. So that's a little bit of the backstory of this. Our answer was to go after this consultant to develop the training and have it be reviewed by our Title VI officers at the state and the federal level, just to make sure that they concurred with the content. So we did that. Hampton Roads approach was to work closely with the Federal Civil Rights Division at USDOT to deliver the training, and they extended the invitation. So we did it 2 years in a row where we were able to provide that training and content delivery to the network of PDCs and MPOs. And we were actually next on the list to deliver the next training in partnership with Federal Highway Administration. And last fall, the funding for that was cut. And so they weren't able to do the training. So we now own this deck, which as long as we keep it updated and current to the evolving regulation, we'll be able to continue to provide the content material. So it's ended up being a pretty good investment.
I'm kind of surprised this hasn't been, cut with all the other equity programs in our federal government.
Title VI.
Yeah.
It's federal law. I mean, so.
Okay, well, just so we're aware. There's definitely things that have been cut that were federal law, so I'm just, okay.
It's a remarkable time.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay.
so some of the slides are gonna read kind of like, we tried to go through and sort of take out the parts that felt a little bit more like it's like a training workshop, because that's what the curriculum was developed to be. And we obviously don't have enough time to go through like a half-day workshop with you all today. So I'll skip through some of the slides, but basically this was like the set of learning objectives that we had for the workshop when we last did it with the state. So a little bit about, this is the text of the law. It's in United States Code, Chapter 42, and really getting at the heart of the fact that discrimination is not permitted to happen, and the protected classes there are the identities of persons that are protected under the federal law from an anti-discrimination perspective.
How does this differ from the hiring or the equal rights or,
Equal opportunity.
yes.
EEO is connected to Title VI.
Oh.
So if you think about sort of like almost like a heredity tree, this is sort of the parent code section.
Well,
Doesn't expressly say to.
So, as I said earlier, all programs, activities, anything that touches federal money is subject to Title VI. There's no getting around it. And so that's an important thing as we think about this. And again, why this joint committee effort is really important, because Title VI is something that Plan RVA is subject to. It's something that the MPO is subject to, and there's no real differentiation in the core compliance requirements of Title VI to our organization. In addition to that, all staff members and all persons, companies, vendors that we hire are also subject to Title VI. And those provisions, particularly in contracts that we engage with contractors or consultants that are being funded with federal dollars, we actually have to append the Title VI terms and conditions into those contract documents as well. So you start to see that, you can imagine, kind of, now kind of ad lib a little bit, but you can start to imagine that sort of when you read this, we might readily think of public engagement and sort of the way that we think about how we engage with the members of the community, around Title VI. But then you can start to see when it talks about how it extends from a compliance perspective, that it also has to do with our employment practices as an organization that employs people, and also as a purchasing entity who employs contractors and vendors and subrecipients and other organizations to help us do our work in our communities. So there's implications from an employment practice perspective and from a purchasing and procurement perspective as well. So again, I'm not gonna really like read through, but just kind of like when we do this training, that's why it's really important. We've got staff members that are working with one another and supervising. We also have staff members that are involved directly and indirectly with public engagement. And we have staff members that are involved indirectly and directly with purchasing and vendor relationships. So it's really one of those things that while the regulation does require that every recipient of federal dollar identify a Title VI officer, that is me. It's also really important that everybody on our staff has a general understanding of Title VI, because it's a big deal. I'm pulling it up on my screen too, because I've got a glare. So I'm gonna look at this. And so who's protected? This is a little bit of, I think sometimes it's hard for people, or I remember when we went through this with our staff, when we name the protected classes, this is not, Title VI is not specific to any one group of people. It protects everybody. We all have an identity. We all have a race. We all have a gender. We all have a national origin. We all are part of those classifications of how we classify people. And therefore we are all protected under Title VI. And so that's a really important thing to do. The key to this is that from a thinking perspective, and this is one of the areas where I did do an amendment to the slide based on the most recent guidance that's come out this week. The purpose of this is to eliminate barriers and conditions that prevent or prohibit equal access, participation, and it used to read and benefit from federally assisted programs and activities. The recent guidance that we've gotten as of April 23rd brings into question the idea of disparate impact analysis. And so this idea that members of the community should benefit more or less based on their particular identity within a protected class. And so this is really I'll tell you, this is really the rub, I think, of where non-discrimination and DEI kind of come head to head. And so this idea that has been a long evolving understanding and a lens that diversity, equity, inclusion is really taking into account the fact that not everybody's starting from the same place.
Yeah.
And there are the notion that there are historical structural and institutional impacts that have affected a group of people over time that have positioned them to be less well positioned to achieve the same benefits as another group of people. That's kind of an underlying premise of how we think about and have more recently thought about diversity, equity, inclusion. The executive order that was issued in earlier this week speaks directly to that. That premise is counter to the law that states that discrimination cannot occur based on any of those identities. And so I think that what they're really driving at is that they're saying that if it is okay, I'm going to use this in like a really concrete example. It is okay to affirmatively market a request for proposals for contracted services to Black and brown businesses. However, the criteria for selecting those businesses may not be based on identity or membership of a protected class. Am I making sense what I'm saying there? So that's how I'm interpreting the latest set of guidance that we're reading, is that it is still okay for us to what I would call like affirmatively market from a public engagement perspective, from an employment perspective, from a procurement perspective, to historically unserved and underserved communities, as defined by our kind of local history and conditions and community. However, we cannot give preference on the decision-making part. We cannot say that we are going to hire X number of people who meet a particular identity classification, or we're not going to procure a certain dollar amount of services, which is what a lot of organizations have done over the last few years. They've given preference basically on the back end, on the benefit end. So that's I think where we're really sort of starting to understand the distinguishment between the guidance that we're getting and the guidance that we've historically gotten.
So this is potentially coming into conflict with like SWAM laws or SWAM policies.
Yeah, so disadvantaged business enterprise requirements, that actually was struck about a month ago from the Federal Transit Administration. There were requirements around if you're doing a certain volume of business with your federal money, the expectation is that you should be doing X% with DBEs. That requirement was eliminated about a month ago. They haven't said we're not allowed to still strive to do business with that particular community or the particular communities that qualified as disadvantaged businesses, but there's no longer a mandate to push business at a certain level to businesses that meet that requirement. SWAM is the same kind of thing. So SWAM still exists. There's just not the same performance metric structure to ensure that SWAM businesses get X share of the business. Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's been something I've been thinking about a lot over the last 3 months. So it's like, this is good practice for me to be able to kind of talk it through with the group, but this is how I'm kind of starting to process it and understand it. And I'll highlight a couple of places where I really don't know, and I haven't been able to find clear guidance, and we're still trying to figure out as an organization strategically who to ask for certain things. So I'll flag those when we get to it. So generally speaking, the idea here, and this was kind of an activity that the trainers did, but so I've given you the answers already, but this sort of helps to start to kind of articulate, what. So the first one is facilities at a transit provider underwent renovations with a federal grant. An employee alleges that their facility located in a locality that is predominantly lower income did not receive the upgrades. Is that discriminatory is the question? And the answer is no, because income or income level is not a protected class. The next example is an MPO recently completed its long-range plan. Senior community that is predominantly Hispanic says that they were unable to attend meetings at the offered time and would like to contribute. Is that a Title VI compliant? Yes, because language and race and ethnicity are part of the domain of the protected classes. And so in that instance, we would still be wanting to ensure that all members of our community are welcome. And so those accommodations for time, location, interpretation, accessibility, all of those things would still be applicable. So kind of gives you a couple of examples there. We can, and we will share this deck as well after the meeting to kind of take a look at it more deeply. There's an inherent connection between Title VI and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so ADA prohibits entities from discriminating against people with disabilities. Again, that's not just physical disabilities, it's the full range of how disabilities are defined in the law. And so the idea is that we cannot implicitly exclude anybody with a disability from participating in services, programs, or activities. And so this creates us an opportunity for us to really be thoughtful about how we approach our public engagement, how we approach a lot of the work that we did when we moved into the space really was focused on, we hired Matthew Shapiro from Six Wheels Consulting to help review every element of our design plan for the space, to think about sensory disabilities, to think about physical disabilities and modality, but also to think about ways that we could attenuate visual stimulation and auditory stimulation, to really be mindful to the extent that we could of how the physical design of our space might impact different members of our community as a guest or as a prospective employee. In addition to the Title VI Act, there's also the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987. As best I can tell, all of these amendments, initial federal code sections and subsequent amendments are still in effect. There are complementary executive orders that have been issued interpreting different sections of this United States Code over the last several, decades, that according to what we've seen in some of the 2025 executive orders appear to repeal them. So we're still trying to kind of understand what lives in the actual federal law code versus what was an interpretation through an executive order. And that's a little bit, I'm just going to be honest with you, a little bit of where we're not completely clear right now, because what are we at? There's like 50 some executive orders for 2025 so far. So, I mean, I know not every administration has had so many executive orders, but I mean, you think about, is it over 80?
Yeah.
Okay. And not every administration has, done 80 in 4 months, but we've got a lot of executive orders that have stacked up over the years and over the administration. So it's a lot to kind of sift through and figure out. So we're trying to kind of understand this, but you'll see most of the citations here go back to the code, US code, and not to the executive orders that have been helpful in some cases, understanding and interpreting. So what does it mean to be a recipient of federal financial assistance? Basically, everything that we do probably has some kind of connection to federal dollars, just because of the way that our organization is funded. And so when I think about Title VI, I don't really think about it being relative to one particular program, whether that's funding from Federal Highway Administration or US EPA or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It really doesn't matter for us, because everything we do, because we receive $1 federal funding, it all is subject to Title VI compliance. So we try in the agency to make sure that everything we do is compliant with Title VI, and really don't try to distinguish program or funding source, because it would be inefficient. It would be incredibly inconsistent to try to figure out what we're doing in each program. It gets a little bit sticky because some of our funding partners have more specific requirements, and I'll show you examples of that in a second, where they say, I'll show you in a second, where like DOT has some very specific interpretations of how Title VI should be interpreted and implemented for purposes of transportation planning. So we get in a little bit of some different things there, versus EPA has a point of view from a different perspective. And so we do have to kind of reconcile and figure out how to navigate that. So this is how we can kind of think about this, and it might be easier. I'll switch this side. So if you think about it, there are coordinating agencies. So as I mentioned, there's the actual United States, and then there are these entities within the United States government, like the Federal Highway Administration or the Federal Transit Administration, which are two agencies that we're very familiar with because they're our biggest funders. Those two federal agencies, FHWA and FTA, funnel their dollars through state complementary agencies, VDOT and DRPT, And then ultimately, so technically speaking, we are a sub-recipient under this model with our transportation funding. We are a primary recipient on other types of grant funding. And so again, our relationship to the federal government is somewhat dependent on the particular funding agreement and program. But the thing that doesn't change is that Title VI applies to everybody on this page, whether it's our contractor, it's us as a subrecipient, or us as a primary recipient, doesn't matter. So Department of Justice, another federal agency, is responsible for the oversight, coordination, and implementation of Title VI, and ultimately is responsible for the accountability, the accountability of the laws. Individual federal agencies, as I mentioned, also have different mechanisms that they interpret the law and how that relates to the specific programs that they administer. So US DOT has its own Office of Civil Rights that coordinates with DOJ and provides guidance specific to transportation programming. See a lot of heads nodding, so y'all get what I'm saying here. And then with under DOT, there's Federal Highway, they've got their own Title VI team, as does FTA, and they do their own practices around how they monitor for compliance and whatnot. So it's kind of complicated if you imagine that across all organizations. Andrew, I think this is getting at the question that you were asking earlier. So we actually are subject to a Title VI review that happens jointly by FTA and Federal Highway, and they include that in our federal recertification. So Title VI compliance is evaluated by the federal government every 3 years. The state Department of Transportation, not DRPT, but VDOT, takes responsibility for a state level review of metropolitan planning organizations and planning district commissions for Title VI compliance, and they also do it on a 3-year cycle. Their 3-year cycle typically is about 6 months before the federal, and they do that kind of intentionally. So let's do a state level review. And I think the rationale for that is that the state views itself as a partner with PDCs and MPOs for federal recertification. So they try to time the state review for Title VI proactively as a technical assistance resource to say, you know, here's almost like a dry run of what your federal review is going to look like. We can identify any deficiencies or issues or errors, and we can approach this from a technical assistance perspective so that we're helping you achieve your certification later in the year. So that's been my experience with recertification reviews and how the state kind of thinks about that from a regulatory perspective.
Do you mind if I, let me know if this is too
Sure.
in the weeds, but just to, so I have a better idea. Is that typically with the local assistance division or with like the civil rights division?
Civil Rights Division.
Civil rights division, okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah, so Farrell Solomon is
Yeah.
who's conducting our review right now. And that's also coincidentally who we work with and Karina and others on the team to think about training and development of knowledge resources outside of the certification process. So lots of kind of duplicative stuff in here, but this is again the sort of the summary of what the Title VI Act of 1964 is amended, and then also the Civil Rights Restoration Act include here. And this is where you start to see the sort of interconnections between Title IX in education and age discrimination in Section 504 in subsequent legislative activities to kind of pull in more ways that we were trying to protect against discrimination over the kind of the evolution of these laws. Okay, so that was kind of just a basis overall of kind of how Title VI works and that kind of thing. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the connection point. So we talked about it for purposes of Plan RBA and the TPO. We think about Title VI compliance in sort of 3 general buckets: public participation, employment, and procurement. So, you know, the idea is that from a Title VI planning perspective, we want to identify what are those proactive steps that we're going to take in each of those 3 buckets. And that's how our Title VI plan is designed. It lays out kind of what our obligations are, where those obligations come from, who told us we had to do these things, how are we measuring that, how do we think about this, what's our public participation plan, how do we talk about Title VI, what do we do to be able to assure that the people on our staff are trained appropriately to be able to manage this compliance? And then how do we monitor whether or not we're achieving the goals that we had or not? It's kind of the general outline of the document that we shared with you in the packet. Again, this is a slide that I left in here because I candidly do not know if this DOT order stands or it doesn't. I don't know the status of it. So it's one of the question marks that we have out there. So we're still trying to kind of understand, which pieces and parts of the administrative guidelines are in effect, and which have been repealed. There's, as you can imagine, I mean, there's not like an index that you can go to and check the status of stuff. So this will be one of the technical assistance questions that we pose to the state. And my best guess is they'll have to pose to the federal agencies. As best I can tell, though, again, thinking about this, so the requirements for public participation and meaningful engagement in our communities comes from federal code. So I don't see where there's really any deviation from what we were striving for a year ago to what we're striving for now. I think that all that stays the same. I think the fundamental principles of how we approach public engagement and our efforts to reach into communities don't change. That from my reading and kind of looking at this and the guidance that we've gotten so far, it doesn't appear that anything changes. The exception to that is that last part there, where you can see the executive order. I haven't seen any information about this. But I don't know how the early executive order at the beginning of 2025, naming English as the language of the United States affects limited English proficiency. That's what LEP stands for. And so I just don't know where that kind of, again, affirmative approach to thinking about proactive translation of materials and documents. So currently we've been working to try to have more of our public facing materials translated into at least Spanish because of the high number of people in our communities that speak that language as their primary language. I just don't know. So it's a thing that I'm trying to get the answer to, and also understand whether are we allowed to do it and is an eligible expenditure of funding. So, and those things, there may be different answers to each of those questions, and really kind of understanding what's what is an outstanding question mark for me. So again, anything that you see in here, I left LEP because I feel a little bit like until we're told we can't and it's not eligible for funding, I think we will continue to strive to provide content in the languages that our residents speak. We'll continue to have, I mean, the internet is sort of enabled, Kristen, we were talking about this already. I mean, there are tools that exist in the public domain for people to translate into many different languages. I can't remember how many languages our social pinpoint can be translated into, but
We have 10 currently.
so, yeah, so I mean,
more.
yeah, so we're gonna keep enabling that kind of thing, even when we're not proactively hiring some translation services. I mean, we're gonna still try to make sure that that happens, and we'll just have to sort of follow it as we go and understand that.
But from the last slide that you showed us and this one, it seems like, yeah, I'm looking at the line requirements of federal financial assistance, and then I'm also seeing 23 CFR 200 and 450, which I think are the codes that are specifically related to MPOs. Is there question about whether the requirements of federal funding for MPOs is up in the air, or like is any of this touching those?
Yeah,
Please.
I think so.
Okay.
Because the we're due for federal reauthorization. And so really any federal program, I mean, and I'm sure you guys are talking about this, a lot in your office. And if Tony were here, I'm sure, Stan is thinking about this a lot. Any federally funded program that is not authorized is really at risk. I mean, we've been functioning in this pretty dysfunctional federal funding situation for a long time, where programs get reauthorized, not actually, but through a kind of continuing resolution, they just keep getting funded, but they're not actually reauthorized by Congress. The transportation programs actually have benefited from a pretty regular cadence of reauthorization, which is under the umbrella that MPOs are established and funded and that kind of thing. So we're due for our regular cycle, but like, the federal reauthorization of the programs that support seniors, that hasn't been reauthorized in over a decade.
Right.
It's just been
Yeah.
functioning in that way. So the programs like Meals on Wheels, it's sort of sounds weird to say this, but like from a mechanical perspective, Meals on Wheels is a lot like MPO funding. It has, it's like out there in limbo. And so, transportation reauthorization is due in the upcoming congressional cycle. And so we'll be watching it closely to see what happens. Our National Association of MPOs feels pretty confident that the MPO infrastructure is in pretty strong alignment with the administration. I mean, when you think about like defederalization and pushing more kind of accountability and responsibility to either state, regional, or local government, the MPO structure lends itself really well to that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we'll see what happens, but yeah, I mean, we're in kind of a really unique time where anything that's not reauthorized is gonna, again, going back to kind of this exploration of what each branch of government has the authority to do. There's a lot more authority to make changes when Congress hasn't been doing their part for a long time.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying not to be like editorializing, but kind of what I'm reading right now. So again, a lot more on public participation and you know, our strategies to involve different corners of our community. And I think the idea is that, you know, we're going to continue to follow the spirit that all are welcome, and we're going to strive to make sure that that sentiment that all are welcome is felt by all. And so that kind of proactive approach into specific communities, like, I don't see a reason why we're not going to be able to continue to do that unless we're told otherwise. We just need to make sure that we're not having events, and we never have done this, where we're having events exclusively for a certain community or a certain population. It's not how we would not be a luxury if we were in a position where we could start to say like, this is only, we're gonna have maximum, you know, we've got a capacity issue and we have to start limiting the room. Wouldn't that be great?
Can I add that we did recently co-host a transportation town hall for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing with the Virginia Department of Deaf and Hard of Hearing. But it was open to all, and other members of the community who had an interest in attending were there. So and we were clear to say that. But obviously, having interpreters there was for the folks who needed that service. And to listen intently. So I think that's, you know, one area where I would say, if we're creating something at the outset, sort of understanding that it's an all are welcome, we would welcome anyone who wanted to participate in the LRTP. What we found that was that people who already had an affiliation or would see that in that way, we're coming, but
Yeah.
there were a few members that were interested and came, that were not part of that particular group.
And I think what this work group has talked about in other meetings and what Kristen's talking about is really this idea of like meaningful impact. So how do we make places and spaces welcoming and comfortable for everyone? You know, if there's provision of translation services that I don't need, that doesn't inhibit my ability to benefit from the content that's being shared, but it also lets my neighbor come who does need that. And so I think that that's kind of the idea.
Universal design concept.
Yes, absolutely. And so this, you know, our Title VI plan sort of outlines that kind of recognition that we've got people across our community who come with varying gifts and talents and needs. And so how do we think about that? And I don't even feel like I need to say this to you all because it's in the spirit of everything that we've had in conversation thus far.
Just one more.
Please, yeah.
Because in our engagement work, we don't put out a bid for engagement, you know, please tell us, everyone, where you would like us to come, and then we sort of go back in a room and decide. I think we're absolutely on the opposite end of that, where we're looking and searching and asking for input. And I think that is a really important distinction in the way that public engagement is typically happening. Is that you know, you can't be everywhere and all the places. So capacity is probably the first issue. You know, there are 3 things happening tomorrow. we would love to be at all. But, you know, it's not possible, but we didn't go through sort of evaluation, other than some data, and I think data was really a big decision maker about where we're gonna be tomorrow. Not because there was sort of a nebulous, you know, oh, that would be more fun, or we would like to be there. It was really, we will capture more of the voices that we do not have enough participating in this process from data. So
Whereas the Latino Farmers Market will be beneficial and fun.
yeah, it will be fun, yeah. And also, we have never done that. So again, it met a criterion of not having been.
Yeah.
But we are, I think we want to be mindful of continuing the work and being in compliance. I don't think those things are, for us, seem like they're just this more structure that can help us ensure that we're more clear about what we're doing.
And so my thinking is that, as I described earlier, that in the example of the provisions around disadvantaged businesses, disadvantaged business enterprises, and some of the SWAM kind of metrics. My thinking is that the same logic might apply when we think about limited English proficiency and language access. And so while there may not be a mandate anymore, I don't know whether this DOJ requirement is holding up or not. While there's not a mandate necessarily anymore, I don't think that we are prohibited from making those affirmative steps to make sure that we can connect with people who don't speak English as their primary language. Just like we wouldn't, we've been striving over the last several years to make sure that we are producing public facing content that's at the reading level of the communities that we're trying to serve. Like, we won't, that's not a mandate that we've ever had before, but it's good outreach practice to try to make things as consumable for the people that we're trying to reach as possible. So in my mind, trying to take jargon and wonky words and things like that and make it into like normal people talk is the same thing as trying to provide it in a language that people speak, if that makes sense. We'll see if that holds, but like things like Kristen was talking about, there used to be a pretty strong prescription around this like 4-factor analysis for language. We can still use data to understand, you know, where places and spaces are that the majority of the people don't speak English as their primary, you know, or native language, and it would be beneficial to them to have that translation, whether that's American Sign Language or it's, you know, another spoken language. Am I making sense what I'm saying? Okay, cool. Any kind of comments or feedback so far?
I just wanted to emphasize that I think what you're saying is in line with something that we're seeing across the board in this sort of industry. Like, a significant amount of my job right now is trying to take our highly technical manuals and turn them into normal people words that regular people can understand. It's like I put my technical manual writing from 2 years ago into a like language those readability indicators, and all of them are like postdoc. Like, you can't understand this unless you wrote it. And so I think that is a push for accessibility that's kind of happening across the board.
And I reminded, I mean, when Kristen gave that presentation of, I think when you were heading into the teen summit, you also translated to teen, like, because that's a different language than.
And actually,
you know.
I've just kept using that same one because it's a great opening question. Just strip away, you know, you feel like you should have acronyms and things, and actually, you know, once people go to the site, they'll see all of the things, but the initial question. So we're all a team at some point, everyone in this was.
I have a quick question. And I really appreciate this overview, so thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's kind of like, it's more talking than I had wanted to do,
No,
but
I think it's really
we're
important
processing
and
it
really-
together.
It's really timely, obviously, so but I guess, and I feel like I need to be a lawyer to deeply understand all of this and the whole scale and scope, but my question kind of is, because like Title VI is all about non-discrimination, right? Like, that's the basis of it. Got it. And yet an executive order comes along that's attempting to kind of like warped that a little bit, so I'm just kind of trying to understand what. I can only think of the word trumps, but like what trumps, like, does the executive order shift the essence of Title VI? Like, I know you all said
Yeah.
that it's federal law, so only Congress could shift it, right, and have to go through that whole process, but.
Interpretation.
Yeah, that's the kind of,
It's just-
so, yeah, so, I mean, this is where we are, and I think, I think we've got some handouts with a nice piece that, the American Association of MPOs pushed out yesterday, so, I mean, Ken and I cannot tell you that we have thoroughly processed and digested everything, but we talked this morning, and we thought it would be a good idea to just share it with you, and Cameron, we'll make sure that we share this link with you as well. I think AMBO does a nice job of kind of saying, this is what we know, this is the information that's been provided, and this is what we think it means.
Yeah.
So they're helping us kind of process this. The law is the law, but the law very seldom tells you how to comply with the law. And it is up to the administration to build that scaffolding and that framework to say what the law means in kind of practical terms. And so the current 2025 executive orders, by virtue of the fact that the previous administration's executive orders have been by executive order repealed, rescinded, taken away. The current executive orders are the administrative instructions for how to interpret and obey the law. Some of them are more clear than others. And so under an executive order, so an example in real time, the executive order that was issued on the 23rd includes in that a directive to federal agency heads to then further take the law as interpreted by the executive order through the executive order. And then that agency head is supposed to then take that and say, okay, this is what this means to this agency that I'm responsible for. And then there will be further guidance. So it's like this cascade of instructions that get issued. Some of this, I'm going to tell you, is completely normal. Like, this is the environment that as recipients of federal funding, there's always a new lens, a new take from a secretary or a federal and state agency head. I mean, that practice is not unusual. The volume and speed with which this particular set of changes are happening is what's unusual.
And the potential to be targeted for what might be considered non-compliance, even if you were to continue to do some of the really
Yeah.
important work that we're doing.
And then we've seen, so with that volume and speed that's happened in 2025, we've also seen an uptick in the number of court cases, suits filed. And so it's kind of, and I think that there's a line in the AMPO thing about, we fully expect that certain groups are going to file suit and that this will be taken up in the court. And so we have this interpretation of the law, the secretary's position on what that law means, the transportation programs as an example. And it may well get reframed through the courts. And that's been, I mean, we've watched this evolve in the news with a lot of different things happening. And then you'll even see in Secretary Duffy's memo that I think we also provided, there's a citation not just of the law and the President Trump's executive orders, but case law that was established. So I mean, you can sort of see it's like, this is like, it's like, I was gonna say gumbo, I've never made gumbo. It's like a stew and it keeps getting more ingredients added to it. And I think sometimes you're like, oh, I added too much salt. And so we've got to neutralize that. And so I mean, but this is like what's happening. And so we're getting a bigger and bigger pot of stew. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but that's kind of
The
what's going
salt
on.
thing is funny because there's like wisdom that you cannot add. It doesn't actually dilute the salt. It's weird. It's like.
It seems like a lot of it is also tying together things from different areas. So like the case law that's cited is the 2023 Harvard case about admissions programs, but then that is now being extrapolated to
Yes.
include other things.
Yes.
And including sex-based everything else. They're saying like, because this applies to racial discrimination, it also applies to sex discrimination. And it seems like it's kind of being expanded and then extrapolated or applied elsewhere.
Yeah, and I was at something in February in DC and it was the Association of Municipal Lawyers Executive Director was talking and she was sort of talking about that, sort of this interesting phenomena about case law. And so there's always this kind of instance where a judge reviews a case, they write their opinion, and then that, you know, kind of becomes the case law, and then something else happens that cites that, and you're like, whoa, I didn't mean that for that. I meant that for this situation. And so it's like this ongoing and ever sort of interpreted thing. And she was talking about this, and I don't know where things stand because this was in February and we're in April now, but so we have the non-discrimination law, the anti-discrimination law. We have kind of this evolving over the last 50 years, sort of understanding about how kind of like, I think DEI has evolved, and this idea that there's disparate impact and there's the idea of a thought, a way of thinking that treatment of people differently isn't discriminatory if the intention behind it is to actually create, like, I think about that picture that we probably have all seen where the kids are trying to look over the fence and
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
you know, the boxes are there. So the treatment of them, of the individuals is different based on their height, right? And if height were a protected class, then it's really totally applicable. I think, but the benefit that they're receiving is that they all get to see over the fence, right?
But if fence wasn't there.
So.
Sorry,
So-
I'll stop.
So like, I think we're seeing now that there were cases introduced that said if the taller person wanted to have the benefit of the same height box as the shortest person, they should be allowed to do that because it was discriminatory. And so the thing that they got was the discrimination, not the thing that they benefited, right? And so that's, I think, what's in tension right now is that kind of, what are you looking at? What are you measuring? Are you measuring whether everybody got the same view? Or are you measuring whether everybody got the same help to get that view? And that's, I think that's the tension that is existing right now. And there was one set of cases that this lawyer was talking about that said that if you are in the majority and most people are tall and the fence was built for most people who are tall, who could look over it, then it was okay to give the minority, the short people, the bigger box, because then you're making it like that person's like most people. And so that idea is that the tall person didn't get what the short person got. That's okay because you're then, right? Then another person said in a different context, no, that doesn't resonate with me. Everybody should get, so that's like, those were the competing cases that she was talking about in February, and she was citing, and to your point, the two cases, I think, interestingly enough, had nothing to do with race. They had everything to do with, if I remember correctly, gender and I think marriage equality, I think were the two that they were citing. And so it was like kind of a peculiar mashup, but that's what they were talking about.
I believe one of them was the one about rights of American citizens, spouses of non-citizens. I
Maybe.
think that was one.
Yeah, I can't remember. And for some reason, I also have in my head, there's like a law in Virginia that says that we need to have a dedicated space for pumping.
Mhm.
And then there was sort of a concern that, well, if that space is dedicated for pumping, are men not allowed to go into that room? And if we now created a space that only like mothers.
Well, I can answer that question because Mr. Holland went and took a nap in the restroom room this week because he's doing his treatments. And again, it's just a quiet room. I mean, so again, is it, renaming it or is it like what?
No, it's true.
It's
So
just so
we went through the same
ridiculous.
thing and trying to comply with that law, but then thinking about our space. well, how do we make this a space that we can use it as a quiet room? And so it doesn't matter whether you a person who suffers migraines or you need a
Yeah.
pump. I mean,
Yeah.
like, we're gonna comply with the law, but we're also gonna make it a space that, you know, anybody in our office who needs to go in there can go in there and hopefully feel comfortable, you know? So, yeah,
But again, it's not in Spanish or a different language, so someone might not know to go in there, so.
Yeah.
Because they've taken away all Spanish on the websites for the federal government.
so I think I'm seeing that you have to go.
Yeah,
So
but we're,
before-
yes,
before-
I think I have to go.
Before you go,
Okay.
if I can just say as you're
Yeah.
walking out, I think I probably have made my point that there's sort of a lot of questions out there lingering. And so I think what we're trying to do is get a little bit of a game plan in this meeting about how we want to approach this. And I think that guidance is going to continue to come out that's going to make things a little bit clearer for us, but I'm hoping to crowdsource with you all some of the questions that we need to ask since we're in this like review technical assistance perspective. And also to kind of understand, you know, how do we think about what's important and how, I think you said this really well a moment ago. We want to be compliant. And we also want to meet the intent of our goals to make sure that we're as accessible to our community as possible. So I think we're looking for a little bit of crowdsourced wisdom on how to strike that balance. So I feel like that's the charge as it's been evolving.
If you have things that you guys are gonna talk about that you wanna send to me, so I
Yeah.
can, you know, put through some input that'd be great.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
No, thank you. Appreciate your
you.
time.
we have a parks person that's retiring. I promised I'd get to this thing and it's already been going on for an hour and a half, so I.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
So if you want to pull the screen down, we can just have Cameron come back on the big part. Hey Cameron, so I think my question for you all is, and again, I'm sorry for talking so long, but when Ken and Janice and I met to kind of plan this meeting, we were talking about like how do we think about what the next step should be? And we're heading into summer. I mean, people's schedules get a little bit different in summer. And so thinking about this, our goal would be to present recommendations for a revised Title VI plan for the August 7th policy board meeting. And then it would go to the commission in September. So we've got some time here to think about. We also were looking at the CTAC committee meeting schedule. The CTAC typically meets every other month. But kind of taking a little bit of wisdom out of context, that Andrew, you shared with us, like maybe we could think about proposing a meeting schedule that met the needs of the committee as opposed to just like we meet because we meet every other month. And so I think that there is some flexibility that if we needed to deviate, we could work with the CTAC members on that. But right now, I believe the CTAC would be scheduled to meet. If we just followed the every other month schedule, they would be meeting in July. So, you know, we kept that schedule. We've got between now and second week of July to come up with a game plan or a recommendation for the Title VI plan.
Makes sense. Can I ask what the scope of our recommendations might be? Would it be in terms of our understanding and interpretation of the changes to Title VI requirements, of how we could better meet our
Yeah.
understanding?
Good question. So I think there might be 3 buckets of things that would be helpful from the committee, and maybe there's more, but Ken's identified some really just like practical, tangible things that need to be updated. Like we moved since the last time we wrote the Title VI plan, so our address needs to be updated, and that needs to be pulled kind of all the way through. So there's some just actual accuracy things that need to be incorporated into the updates. My suspicion is that staff can probably mostly handle that bucket, but ground truthing that with you all to make sure that I mean, obviously the address is like an empirical yes or no. There might be other things that we want to kind of just do like a gut check with you all with. I think the second one is overall, does the plan make sense? I mean, it's geared as a public document, so does it actually make sense? If it doesn't make sense to you all, we have no hope of having it make sense to people who don't kind of function in the space. So that would be really helpful. If there are readability, make sense, kind of flow type things, that would be really helpful. And then I think that there's this third bucket of kind of like, what are our intentions? And does that actually come through in the document? And so that might be where this committee wants to spend most of its time around kind of what's important. And I will tell you that our current approach to the Title VI plan is make sure that we commit to the things that we actually know we can achieve. And then we have kind of more internal documents where we articulate the things that we would like to do, but are a little bit more of a stretch for us. So the way you all approach the policies, I think is a great example of that. Like we let's start here. We'll put that into the plan because that's the thing that we say we're gonna do, and that's the thing we have to measure our evaluation against. But then what's that other list of things that you would like to see evaluated and incorporated into our practices over the longer term? Sorry, I talked so much, Ernest.
Well, no, you're good.
Yeah, gotta go though.
No, I just need to stretch my knee.
Okay.
I'm sure by the next time we meet, there will be a clearer general understanding of how these 48-hour-old
Yeah,
guidance things affect what is and is not required or allowed.
yeah, and I mean, as an example, Kristen, I mean, you're going to the NARC conference,
No, it's actually
Or-
not,
which,
it's connected, but in some ways, but we won't be presenting
You're not-
there as a separate.
but you're not attending the actual conference, you're just going to
No.
like the pack to the companion event?
Yeah, we are part
Okay.
of the Smart Growth America, there's just a
Okay.
relationship there.
Sorry,
It's occurring.
I thought they were
Currently.
letting you go to the whole conference.
No.
Well, nevertheless, we've got some staff members that are teed up to be in some kind of peer learning cohort things. And even if it's not content specific, I think that there's places like the fellowship,
It's a learning cohort.
the learning cohort that you're gonna be part of with Emily. I mean, I think that there's some things over the next month and a half that are going on, probably spilling into the middle of June, that even if we don't get agency directive guidance, we are gonna be able to kind of be in community with people who do this work across the country, and I'm hoping that that can help us sort of try to figure out how to navigate.
Yeah, and I think we can point out, that, of course, AMPO is following, American Association, MPOs is following this very closely, and in the handout I gave everybody, we've included they have a newsletter that comes out, I guess it's weekly. And, in here, they, specifically have done an analysis of this memo. So I think we can rely on that
Yeah,
information as well.
they've been hosting Q&A calls, so we have not participated in those, mostly due to scheduling conflicts. They don't give a ton of notice, but I think even things like that, like if we through these conversations come up with questions, AMPO is a really great resource for us, and we can pose those questions to the association. And they've been really good about that. So it's a good point. Did I answer your question, Andrew?
I mean, yeah,
Okay.
it's an evolving situation, so
Yeah.
I'm sure we're all just gonna have to
Yeah,
keep an ear out. And of course, like you mentioned, there's gonna be lawsuits about this, and then things are gonna have to go through courts. And
yeah,
I'm sure the actual fallout from this is going to last for the rest of this administration.
Yeah.
We're not gonna have a clearer understanding.
so to not really be like, I don't want to waste anyone's time. But when we were thinking about the May 15th meeting, it feels like there's some version of this conversation that needs to happen with the whole group, just so that when we do ultimately come back to them, whether that's in July or not, or, sometime between July and August, they kind of get, I mean, this is sort of a little bit harder to wrap your arms around than a normal review would be. So I'd be interested in thinking with you about structuring the agenda for May 15th that would be constructive and helpful, so you don't have to sit through the same thing again, but what pieces of this would be useful to share with the whole group. And then my thought is that our Title VI review with the state, the deadline for us to submit our materials is May 9th. And I'm sorry, Stephanie, I should have put this out. It's easier to see timeline wise, but that's May 9th. And then May 15th is the next CTAC Public Outreach Committee meeting. So I'm almost thinking that, and then like the next week is Memorial Day, I guess, or something. And so I'm wondering if maybe we think about the end of May or into June before this work group convenes again, because that'll give us a little bit of time and space to just collect some more information. And potentially do our staff review of what changes could be made, should be made. You've been asking some good questions lately about certain things, so kind of process wise, so I mean, we might think about this committee or this work group, if you have the ability to do it in your schedules, trying to meet on whatever frequency you think makes the most sense in June and July. And then we could schedule the CTAC meeting around kind of what made sense for that. It's kind of where my head is right now, but
Makes sense to me.
Sounds good, like plan.
did you have something? I felt like you were making.
I did notice, because I was curious about other PDCs and their Title VI plans, and I noticed that Thomas Jefferson, Charlottesville area, Albemarle had a draft that was approved in February of this year. For their public comment, so but in looking at it, you know, obviously there's the whole minority business and enterprise. This has a section there, and so it is. To me, it seems like that it has to be as fluid as it just is, but that there are some, you know, you obviously would be more in touch with, you know, counterparts. But I also noticed that VDOT had a plan that says it's a 2025 plan, but it also still had some like COVID language in it, talking about making plans for virtual meetings. So I think my impression is that these plans are in various states of
Right.
across, and I think that just like recognition of that is kind of good, because this is such an important document to guide our work, whether or not you are in favor of changes happening or in favor of previous changes that happen, right? It still is a guide, and I feel like that can be kind of challenging to look at something and feel like you're wanting to comply with something that is changing. So it made me want to look around and see like who else is like,
Right.
when you feel like you're the only one somehow concerned. So those two are just examples of something that I found. But again, I'm sure they're having discussions around how to update.
I'm sure AMBO and BAMPO are being absolutely inundated with questions about this and will probably be responding to it more.
I would say that in the NPO universe, Northern Virginia's Washcog and Hampton Roads would be probably the two NPOs that I would want to look to as either partners or guides. Mostly because the level of compliance that our three MPOs have is a higher level of standard of compliance than our smaller MPOs in Virginia. And so there's just a reality around capacity and resources that and so that's one thing. Two, we could potentially get reconnected with Kendall, who you talked to early on. She's kind of a guru, Kendall Miller. She used to be at Hampton Roads and she was their Title VI officer. She's kind of a guru when it comes to Title VI. So I would imagine, even though she's in a private consultancy practice now, I imagine she's following this very closely. There's just two thoughts that come across the top of my head. And I can talk to Alec Brebner at BAMPO about whether there's an opportunity for us to work more as a network on this. Because to your point, it's really hard to function in fluidity, especially when everybody else is functioning in fluidity. But at least if we could kind of tether our rafts together, we could get like a little bit more maybe stability or feeling of that. Those are a couple ideas off the top of my head that come to mind. I feel like I was a downer there.
No, I mean, I just want to echo kind of what Kristen said. Even like at my professional work, everyone right now is kind of scrambling to figure out what this means and how it is then implemented. And if things are changing so rapidly, to Martha's point, it makes sense to grab on with the closest other institution that are subject to these changes and see just kind of how they're doing it. Because institutions are going to keep us afloat.
I think Cameron sent a message as well.
Pardon, you did?
I think Cameron sent a message
Oh.
as well.
Did you chat something, Cameron? Sorry.
Oh, no, that was just to me. I just let him know that,
No, I did say a message because it was kind of a joke, like who's Martha Heater? In that this needs to be
Oh.
updated.
Oh,
But
Out of date thing.
it wasn't very funny, so I deleted it.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry for calling you out,
Oh
Cameron.
my God, he was like.
Careful.
I had to come clean.
That's funny.
Nothing.
No, good catch. There's something else, it's totally inside, but there's on my iPad, I can't get here to go away. It's on my own iPad, like every time there's a picture album, that shit, anyway. Nobody cares about that, but.
Yeah, I can't help you with the iPad stuff, sorry.
Well, would it be okay then for us to look at some, maybe we're gonna do a debrief meeting as staff this afternoon. I'm wondering if maybe we get our heads a little bit wrapped around what these investigatory things that we could do, and then we could get back to you all as members to talk about kind of a potential flow. And you all could let us know if there are dates, weeks, times to stay away from as we head into a different, I hope people are able to take a little bit of some time away as the weather gets nicer. So.
Week and a half left in the semester.
You're
Finally
good.
gonna be free a little bit.
Okay,
Good luck finishing up.
yeah,
Thank you.
seriously.
It's a lot, but close to the end.
Not just in a week left in the semester in the program, right?
No, I still have a year
you
left.
still have a year left.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm part-time, so it's a 4-year degree.
I remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah, on you.
the last year shouldn't
Evidence,
be. Yeah,
It'll be
but
different.
it's gonna be light at the end of the tunnel, easier
Yeah.
to sort of keep that in mind and just focus on it.
Okay. Well, then we will plan to see you all on the 15th. And
I think 2 weeks after that makes a lot of sense
Okay.
for this group to meet again, because that will sort of, I mean, all of us are gonna
Okay.
be in the room for that.
And
And
2 weeks after.
yeah, and then 2 weeks, like
So-
a month from now, for this group to reconvene, and then I'm sure we'll have plenty
Okay.
more information at that point, and we'll have another chance at on the 15th to like wrap our brains
Yeah.
around it and.
okay.
Yeah.
Great. In an effort to maybe keep that bigger meeting upbeat, I think that this is in line with what we talked about, but I'm wondering if maybe we tried to think about composition of the CTAC as a way to sort of think about, as we're moving through this pretty dynamic time, how do we seat the table to have that representation of perspective and, reach in the community that we're desiring? Would that be a good topic to put on the
Absolutely.
agenda for the 15th?
Yeah,
And we, in the meantime, could have a staff perspective about, from an engagement, what you all are thinking.
I'm heading to Powhatan today. This afternoon.
Okay.
For that. We'll keep building relationships.
Is that jive with what we've been talking about?
so,
Okay,
yeah,
I would
yeah, I have
love-
it on, I have it on
Okay.
the spreadsheet as a topic.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool.
I would love for us to have some kind of LAP representation on the CTAC, because
Okay.
I don't think that currently exists really, unless
who did you say?
LEP representation, limited English. So, cause
Yes,
I don't
of
think that
course.
currently exists.
Mhm.
But I'm curious if anybody here knows where those communities, like where the biggest of those communities are. I'm assuming in city of Richmond,
we can
but
we can get you that data.
sure. I mean, I'm sure I could look it up. I was like Chesterfield, do you think?
As well as.
And right.
Yeah.
Okay.
so-
Interesting. Yeah, I would love to talk about it
Okay.
more.
I mean, that's
representation like
a 2 point, that's a really good example of, when we look at the makeup, the demographic makeup of, let's say, for example, Charles City, like we might have an idea that like, oh, we want to make sure that we're reaching, but when you look at the makeup and you realize, okay, the possibility of us reaching a community that has such a low recorded count helps us reframe, well, why, how would we go about reaching them and not just showing up at something and hoping we, if already it's 2% of the population, we go to an event, we're expecting to have a huge number of responses from that group. It's
Mhm.
kind of, so I think, as an approach to, I think that is gonna be an example of not going there more, but going to the right places at the right time and building the relationships. And I think that, I don't, that isn't any change in the way I
Yeah.
think about. Like nothing coming out has made me think differently about that strategy, because it's just not efficient to say, we'll just keep going there and hope that the people come. Anyway. But it is important to know that, because you sort of feel bad that you don't have the right, a number of responses, and you need the data to help you understand. Oh, well, we should have recognized them, and what did we do to address that?
Yeah. I think I'm also thinking of it in terms of like, when you think about different cross sections of like demographics, I think a lot, because Richmond has a highly concentrated population, I think it's really easy. This is something that I experience in other work. It's really easy to try to represent multiple groups, and for all of those groups to end up representing the same geographic area. And so you might have somebody from this group, this group, and this group, but they all live in the same neighborhood or the same city or something like that. And so hearing that LEP is concentrated like in Chesterfield and Henrico, that's, to me, is really interesting information, because I think if we were to represent like different racial minority groups, we might find like Richmond is a high concentration of multiple difference of like racial minorities or maybe religious minorities, something like that. But having them spread out, I think is a really useful piece of information to hear. You're getting geographic representation as well.
Yeah, both those are always on our mind.
Yeah.
Martha had to run to a call, but she didn't want to interrupt, but she wanted
Oh,
everybody, to
yeah.
know she's sorry she had to leave. I told her if anything comes up, I'll make sure I fill her in when we debrief this afternoon.
Okay.
I always want to say thank you for lunch. Like, I work here, so thank us, thank you, not me, but thank you.
Thank Lee for lunch. Do you order?
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, y'all have a great.
Take care.